Welcome to SpanReads, not your typical rereads podcast, a 17th shard series where we reread the Cosmere and are giant nerds about it. Today we will be talking about magic and the Cosmere connections in Dawnshard. Joining me is Ian.
Hey, I'm Weiry Writer.
David.
I am still the one and only Windrunner.
Joshua.
Hi, I'm Jofwu.
And I'm Michelle, or firstRainbowRose. This episode will have spoilers for the entire Cosmere. As of recording, the most recent release is The Silent Man. So, what do we want to tackle first?
I mean, I think there's only one option of where we should start. And that is pairing fabric.
Arguably more important than Dawnshard for the future of Rashard.
I mean,
It's not wrong.
You can't go for the best part first. We got to get the rest of it out of the way.
In the book titled Dawnshard?
Exactly.
Yeah, I kept suggesting he should call it aluminum pairing fabrial, and it just didn't stick for some reason.
Remember like when the book was going to be called Wandersail? I totally forgot about that.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
A few
yeah.
minutes ago.
And that's a good title, too. I understand that he thought people might be confused, but I think it would have been fine.
But Dawnshards.
I think the main reveal of this book is that we learn that the Dawnshards are 4 primal commands of Adonalsium used, I believe it says, like, to create all things. Maybe that's true, maybe that's not specifically true. But and then we're ultimately turned against Adonalsium as weapons to kill Adonalsium, which is pretty mind-blowing. Like, we knew that they were weapons, we knew that they'd been used to destroy Ashen, but what they were, where they came from, was pretty mysterious, and we learned just a ton about them in this story.
Yeah, and it's like we've known about the commands as being part of the magic system, like most notably in Warbreaker, because Awakening is the most obvious case of commands.
Mm-hmm.
But seeing of divine commands like this, like on the level of let there be light, like that's always the comparison in my mind. And here we get one of change. It's fascinating. Because by this point, like this release is like shortly before Rhythm of War, where we get 4 more shards of Adonalsium, like bringing us to 14, I think, at that point. So it's like the early days of Cosmere fandom where we only knew like 4 shardic names, and like the fun in the community of like trying to guess what the others are. Getting another mystery like this of like there's these 4 Dawnshards, and we know one of them's named Change, but what are the other 3? What are like the sorts of commands a deity would use to create the universe?
Mm-hmm.
With one of them being Change.
Yeah, it's definitely fun, and it also has partially based on WUBs, but kind of the fun side puzzle of indicating that potentially shards themselves can be grouped under the 4 Dawnshards, and based in part on the mural where we see the sun shattering into 4 pieces, which then shatters into 4 pieces, 16, all that stuff. So it is kind of allowed a lot of people to play with that puzzle a little bit too. It's fun to go back and forth, even if I don't think that anybody's really nailed down exactly how that's all supposed to fit together, even with having most of the shards to look at now.
At this point, we have like so many shards, and I've never seen like somebody categorize them in a way that to me feels like intuitively obvious, like, oh, this is totally what it is. Brandon like went full on committed, like this is the groupings. But I think that it must be, for a while I was just convinced that like it was just sort of a thematic thing, and there's nothing deeper to it. I think that whatever the categories are is going to be something that's like a little bit loosely held. Brandon probably didn't want to like constrain himself too much, but if you kind of look at it sideways, it's like, oh, I can see how like, and I wonder if like the reason that it's splintered that way, shattered that way, is because of the 4 Dawnshards that were used in the shattering. Do you know what I mean? Like,
if different words had been used, different things would have resulted.
Well, just like the way that you're using these 4 commands to shatter ad nauseam, it just kind of, I don't know, makes sense to me that ad nauseam would shatter in some way related to those 4.
Yeah, it's like it's more like the people who are the Dawnshard, because you don't hold a Dawnshard, you are a Dawnshard, according to Nick Lee, which is
They should be Dawnshard
bonkers.
Obviously.
Brandon tried to do this with shards, though, right? Like from what I remember, like a long time, he was like, "Oh no, you are the shard." But then it was like people were like, "Brandon, there needs to be a distinction here. This is not."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Then the fandom started using shard holder a whole bunch, and it was like, "I'm going to give you the term vessel,"
which was great.
Instead.
Which was great. We forced his hand. Sometimes we make Brandon come up with a term.
Sometimes
like shard pool.
Brandon doesn't think about how the fandom will be interacting with a thing. It's more the 4 people who were the Dawnshards were obviously using the commands according to their own interpretations and such. Mm-hmm. That like if those 4 people were different or in a different configuration, because obviously like when Ad nauseam gave the commands originally that became the Dawnshards, like those are fixed. Like it's changed, and then 3 other things we don't know. But individual users, much like to a limited extent, the vessels have an influence on the shard and how their intent is interpreted. I think something similar likely happens with the Dawnshards of like, what does change mean? And like that brings to bear like what you can do with it.
Your understanding and interpretation of the word influences what you can or cannot do with.
I think so.
Are you referencing like Ad nauseam could have shattered into different shards potentially, like that sort of idea than the ones we saw?
Yes. Yeah. Like if like the Dawnshards like had like the configuration of like who was wielding, like I think all of that played a role. Because we know Ad nauseam could have shattered into 16 different shards. So like with the introduction of the Dawnshards and like potentially shards being grouped under them, which again we don't fully know if that's actually a thing or not, but it's an interesting thought experiment. Kind of like rationalizing those 2 things together.
Brandon has said, I a long time didn't know there was a structure, but he said that 16 divides really nicely on a table. And ever since then, I've been like, all right, Brandon, you do have a plan for how these are supposed to break down. Yeah. I was thinking, Ian, that maybe Ad nauseam could have created all creation with 4 different commands. And if there had been 4 different Dawnshards, you could have ended up with different shards.
I mean, yes. But that's getting into, without knowing what each of the commands are, I don't know how simple like coming up with 4 primal commands would actually be.
That's fair. If they're supposed to be fundamental, like, it's possible that it'd be harder to boil them down or alter them too much.
Because I feel like aspects of divinity is something that has a lot more flex than like aspects of like existence itself.
Mm-hmm. Change is a very fundamental concept. Like there's nothing you can obviously extrapolate it into all sorts of complicated things, but just the simple idea of change, like one thing is this and then it's this, is a very, very basic idea.
Mm-hmm. And the other Dawnshard that we sort of know about that's referenced in Sunlit Man is not explicitly named, but is, I believe, said to be like fundamentally opposed to the concept of maybe change or something like it's some sort of
like constant
non-change. Yeah. I don't know.
Like it's like it's hard to like stasis and change, because like that does kind of dip into ruin and preservation, their sphere of influence, where like ruin isn't just change, it's entropy and all of that, but like preservation is stasis. So like what is like Sigzil and Wit's Dawnshard, and how is it distinct from preservation?
I mean, you could think of preservation as maybe having like an element of like stagnation as opposed to like something being protected, like, I don't know,
Yeah.
like there's definitely, I think you could maybe look at it a couple different ways, but it is kind of it does feel a lot more like when you talk about change, you can be like, okay, like cultivation's kind of change and ruins kind of change. And there's like a few others you can throw out pretty obviously, but preservation and not change are pretty closely linked.
Yeah, and it's like not having the name for that,
Mhm.
because like I think that would shine a light, like on what is its core nature. Because like we're seeing a lot of like the pieces of it, but what's like the uniting theme of that Dawnshard?
It's nice that we have, like with Ruin, you also have cultivation, so you can easily see like these two shards are probably both related to change, right? If you're grouping shards, cultivation and Ruin are two very different expressions of like the idea of change.
And
So I think that there's probably something that makes sense that kind of can incorporate preservation and some other concept more generally. But
yeah, definitely.
But like we also get hints at the end of Risen having some heightening like effects with her like enhanced color perception and like harmonics, because like she remarks on like the captain's voice, like seeing like themes of like having investiture like does enhance you across the Cosmere, and there are recurring themes. We see that also happen with Sigzil and Six of the Dusk in similar and different ways.
Yeah, I'm curious how many parallels, like once we see more of the Dawnshards, like will exist, because I do get the sense that something like Sigzil and Hoyd being incredibly hard to kill is probably not something that Risen would get, but like I could see her getting longer life, just because it's a ton of power, like it is interesting.
Really quickly about Risen's change. One thing I do like is Brandon, in all of the books, never negates the hardships that characters go through, because it could be very easy to make it, oh, you've got this piece of divinity, now you're no longer handicapped, and he doesn't do that. And he, like with Kaladin and the depression, it isn't a, ooh, you're magically fixed. And I just really like the fact that that never happens.
Yeah, that would have been, I never thought about that. That would have been bad though if she's like, and now that I have the changed Dawnshard, I am healed. Forget about the chair.
Talking about like the Dawnshard being this massive power, but it's not like, it is just a command, like, and you can't do anything with the command without like anything to command, like like, so like, is it made of investiture? Is it made of some spiritual gobbledygook attached to her spirit web now? Don't really know. But
It's
like,
self-aware.
it's not a hunk. Yeah, it's not a hunk of investiture that can be used to do a thing on its own, which is why she's not allowed to be a Radiant anymore, because that would give her access to investiture that she could soup up with the Dawnshard.
What's the risk, Ian? What could go wrong?
It's fine. I'm sure nothing bad would happen. Risen's a nice girl.
Yeah, no one. Yeah, there's no way she would accidentally eat a spren or blow up a planet.
Yeah, that's never happened in the history of the Cosmere. Definitely didn't happen to Ox. Oh boy.
I know. It makes me wonder. I wonder. Like, I've never been able to decide which they were more concerned about. It's probably the planet thing, but still, I could see like, oh, we don't want to kill his friend for no reason.
Oh, I think the Sleepless are 100% about the planet. Like, an individual's friend, like, who cares? Like, if one person dies, whatever.
I care.
It's like, we're worried about the planet because they live on the planet.
one thing I caught this time was so when Nickley and Risen are having their negotiation, and they're talking about how the power is like now inside of Risen, and he's upset that's been allowed to happen. He says that it's something that they never believed they would have allowed. We who protect planets, and it was interesting to me that it was planets plural that they're trying to is it it's not just Roshar that they're interested in protecting, right? And it's not just the Dawnshard that they're protecting, right? Like they're interested in protecting planets plural across the Cosmere. And it just made me wonder if like if like the Sleepless in general go beyond like just what's happening on Roshar with what they're trying to do.
We know that they do. Like we definitely know like the Sleepless are not native to Roshar, and like that they are on other planets.
For sure.
Yeah,
But
I mean,
How much
big
communication like between like different sets of swarms there are? Like if I don't know if like all swarms like across the Cosmere are like in active communication with one another and are actually planning things, or it's just like they as a culture have decided that they are the protectors of the Cosmere and are doing things like this.
Which
But I think that, yeah.
And I also like, I guess I'm pairing that in my mind with like in Yumi, how like we have this thing set, there's this idea set up that like there are these like wars happening that the Sleepless are involved in, and they want to stay out of whatever her name is wants to stay out of, right? And so I'm really curious, like what the Sleepless as a whole, like are they coordinating with one another on like some bigger scheme? Are there divisions between them and they're fighting against one another?
That's an excellent question. And like you could easily see them being like, okay, we have this one here. We're looking for Dawnshards elsewhere. Maybe like they might not have any more, but they could be still trying to secure others that they haven't been able to find yet. It's definitely possible. I am deeply curious, like how much communication they have with potential other kind of swarms / there was a part of me that felt, because like Yalmaizen is referred to as the first, like I was like, was this the only Sleepless population for a little while and then they have since spread off of Roshar in the time since, or is it that is just one colony that's shown up here?
I think this is just one colony, and I think specifically Yalmaizen like he's the first like they are the swarm that came to Roshar, and so all of the other Rosharan swarms like come from them.
I definitely agree, but I just don't know if that is ever said that explicitly anywhere.
Nickley says
not other ones on other planets. There's definitely ones on other planets still at this time.
I was gonna say Nickley says in the book, we did not come from Roshar, so we prefer the term hordlings. So
yeah, I think it's only in WOBs at this point where Brennan talks about, because there is WOB about like it's only the Rosharan Sleepless that have started imitating humans.
I forgot about that one. That's interesting then, because we see them imitating humans on the does that mean Misaka is in some way downstream of Rosharan Sleepless?
It is later.
Yeah,
it's
later.
But she's kind of called a different. I remember she's got a different sort of like. It's not like she's like, I'm with Yalmaizen. Like she's like the Natrian horde or something.
Natrikatian. I think.
Yeah, I can't remember the exact name.
Right.
Yeah.
Can I just aside? I love like the Sleepless names. They're just like monstrous names. Love it every time.
Yeah. Archlomedarian, Nicleosorm, Yalmaizen. Yeah, they're great. And they also like give great titles to people, like Mother of Machines, like for Navani. Like, yeah, like if you want to name something, go to the Sleepless or the Horn Eaters, because the gods who sleep not, also a banger of a name.
Yeah. One thing I'm just curious about, like, is with this Dawnshard, it's just a specific history of it, like there's a mention of a Dawnshard coming through the cultivation's perpendicularity that's in the oral history of the Unkalaki. Is that this Dawnshard? Is there another Dawnshard on Roshar? Like, who could, like, it seems kind of unlikely, but it's definitely interesting. Did this one come straight from Ashen? Did it, was it left there? Like, I've got lots of I've always assumed that this is a Dawnshard that is associated with what happened on Ashen just because they're so close, but I don't think we know that for sure either,
Yeah.
Lots of questions.
It has to have come later. Because, like, I don't think, like, if it came through the Horn Eater Peaks when the Horn Eaters were there, like, that's so much more, like, recent in history compared to, like, the arrival of humans in the First Desolation.
Yeah, because there wouldn't have been a population yet. They would have had to spend time with the singers to have created the Horn Eaters. So that definitely makes sense.
I mean, it could be. I mean, it doesn't even have to be true. I'm inclined to think that it is. Like, this is the sort of thing where Brandon usually doesn't just like see the legend like this for absolutely no consequence whatsoever. It was interesting to me that the legend is specifically one Dawnshard came through, which I'm inclined to assume that it is this one. And it also makes me inclined to assume that it is the only one that they know about. Like, there could be another, but like, it makes me think that only one came through and only one is there so far as like, at least I guess the Sleepless are aware of, maybe.
Yeah. Whereas in this, there were Dawnshards plural referencing destruction of Ashen, you know, so then I'm like, okay. I went and looked and it just says there are songs from long ago of when this command came through the pool. So they are explicit that it was this one.
So they didn't come to. It makes me think they didn't come together. Like, there was not like two Dawnshards that came through, or 3 or 4, and you know, this is the one that is left. But it was just this one alone. So wherever the others are, who knows? But I wonder. Like, I assume that it was one person, like a person that brought it through.
Yeah.
No, they just had a giant brick wall that they had in art, obviously.
Like, you could have like stuck it to something else, I guess, and like, I don't know, carry it through and then move it from one object to another. But that's just, you know, that's weird.
Like awakened breaths.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, clearly they can put it in something inanimate. Like, I'm curious how, like, what allows them to do that, why they thought that it wasn't able to get out of the mural, you know? Like, they seem surprised that Risen was able to grab it. But, you know, lots of mysteries there.
It's amusing to me that they let her like dive off the ship and like swim through like the underwater currents or whatever and get to this, like, of all places, this underground cavern that happened to like have this Dawnshard sitting in it, and then they show up. Like,
I think they just got there first.
Yeah.
Because Cord is a strong swimmer, and the Lux friend were hastening them on their way.
Yeah, but they weren't like guarding the room of the important thing they're trying to like.
Because the Sleepless are dumb, and they thought a lot of things would never happen that definitely were going to happen.
The lesson is, if you've got giant hordlings that are monsters, park one outside of the cave with your magical weapon, just in case. Just in case.
Park it in the chamber, because I got the feeling that there were 2 different paths in. The Sleepless took like through the caverns versus
connected to the surface, because they were like, oh, if it was connected to the surface, it would be full of water right now.
Yeah, like I think they came up the same way.
I misunderstood that.
But either
but
or,
still breed a much more reasonably sized monstrous hordling that you just stick in there.
Good luck. I'm not getting bored.
Yeah. That's why
I mean,
you have lots of hordlings, so you can pay attention to something else.
Like the hordlings are just part of the thing. It's like, if you just have your hand someplace and you're doing other stuff, like, you don't really care that your hand is in that place.
That's fair.
Yeah.
They were like distracted. Like, during the battle, when they're having the negotiation, Nickley's like, oh, they're kind of, you know, your friends up above are, you know, causing trouble. So like, they were like distracted by it. So it takes some attention to move one of those things around, apparently.
That makes sense.
That I see more as like, even if you're ignoring your hand, if somebody stabs it, you're gonna know.
Yeah,
that's
fair.
Maybe it's like sand mastery, you know, like it's pseudo autonomous. They kind of act on their own.
Sleepless are just so cool. They're nightmare fuel, but they're so cool.
I always think
definitely the coolest Cosmere race.
They always make me think of Oogie Boogie from Nightmare Before Christmas.
Yeah.
Oh, is he the one who's? I haven't seen that forever. He's the bug kind of thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's a good comparison.
I do always love, like, at some point, I think it's Nickley gives like the little explanation. She's like, oh, you're made of like all these little bugs. And she's like, yeah, you're made of little cells. Like, same thing. It's just like a funny, I don't know, metaphor.
Yeah. Like the Sleepless are like, yeah, like, who cares? Obviously a whole bunch of people care, but the Sleepless are just like, this is just the same thing as you, but cooler.
Yeah.
And like the fact that they could interbreed their hordlings with the Lancerin,
at least a little bit, yeah.
Like that's interesting, because, you know, like, interspecies breeding is complicated, and presumably like all hordlings are all more or less the same species, I would think, just with very wide breadth of physical expression and what they look like.
I guess I don't know if I agree with that, but
Yeah.
like I could see like the larger hordlings being kind of a lineage, and like the bodybuilding hordlings being kind of a lineage, and those not necessarily being cross compatible anymore.
It feels part of me wonders if, like, I don't know, I'd love to hear like a biologist talk about it, because I wonder if like it feels like it just breaks all like ideas of, I don't know, biological taxonomy. Like, how do you even classify are they the same species? But like the concept of species like almost doesn't even apply to them. So I don't know. Because but I am inclined to think that they are one hordling could be drastically different from another, like biologically.
I always picture them as beetles. Like, one type of beetle can't necessarily mate with a different type of beetle, but they all kind of look the same.
But also they can look different too.
Yeah. So, and I think that like when they talk about like that they can like, they like among the sleepless, like, oh, maybe like their monster hordlings can mutually interbreed. It seems like they can pass traits between themselves without too much difficulty. If somebody develops something, they're able to pass it along at least somewhat, even if like younger sleepless like Nickley, I think, are better at hiding than the older sleepless.
Yeah, because like when like a horde is like separated, like a new horde is created. Which, Brandon, tell us more about how that happens, please. Unless it will break our brains in the horror of it, we don't know.
That's
why they get like an assortment of like the parent hordes, which might just be one horde. Maybe multiple hordes can come together and mix their hordlings. Like, I want a hordling book, Brandon. Just explain everything about this weird eldritch monster you've made, because I want to know.
I was going to say it would be nice to get like a Shallan sketch page on them, but that wouldn't be enough.
Yeah, it'd be cool though. That's a start.
Yeah.
We have like the Cosmere RPG is a thing now. Like, Brotherwise Games, give us an entire source book about the Sleepless.
Just on the Sleepless.
Instead, we get one-page stats.
Probably pretty hard to kill, if I had to guess.
Yeah.
I mean, Nickley's like, okay, we can battle. You can't kill me.
Another thing with the Sleepless that was kind of fun to see in this is we already kind of had a little bit of an indication from Edge Answer that these are the beings that are writing, those kind of in-world back of the book blurbs, one will save us, one may destroy us. And I enjoyed like that bit being referenced explicitly in the Sleepless conversation when they're talking about how, oh, well, we really like the bondsmith, but he, and he's made the choice of honor, but that is the reason he will destroy us. Like, that's a fun little dusting of foreshadowing to throw on there, and kind of confusion to put in for whatever that's supposed to refer to, which we should be discovering potentially quite shortly.
Yeah.
I like that there's like disagreement among them about it. You can see it. Parklow's obviously kind of off on his own, but like even among their group that are all sort of trying to pull the same direction. The one of them's like, oh, he's not going to destroy us because he made the choice of honor, whatever he says exactly right. But he says, no, that's why. So like it's just interesting that they're not all on the same page.
Well, yeah. And when you point that out, it does make me think like you can read that in a couple different ways, where there's like one where you're like, the Sleepless are watching these four people and like they think, let's say Shallan's going to save us and Kaladin's going to destroy us. Like that's like they're looking at these characters and that's their read in the situation. But if they're having internal disagreements about who that label applies to and kind of like, what does it mean? What does it not? Like, does that mean that was written with access to some sort of fortune? Like, were they having a little bit of future sight and like they're trying to interpret what they understand? And where did they get that from?
That, as we were having this conversation, that popped in my head of like, do they have access to fortune? Like some sort of magic system, like peering into the spiritual realm who knows? Like, and like maybe that's just a function of their distributed mind, like they're closer to the other realms. Maybe, I don't know. But
you stare at the mural long enough and you start to see something.
yeah. So it's like, how do they know these things? Are they just super old and have watched people for thousands of years and know? Well, we know they don't know how people act because they're bad at it. And that's the entire point of the training. The comparison that was in my mind, like as we were talking about the internal disagreements of the sleepless, was the internal disagreements of the diagram of like having this access to a thing they're trying to interpret, but each person is going to interpret that in a slightly different way. It's like, what's the core source for the sleepless's information?
I'd never thought of that. I'm really pleased with us.
Hey, people, if you're not watching SpanReads, you're not watching this. But sometimes we come up with and have interesting conversations. We also get a little bit more Larkin lore in this book with Cheery being sick.
Or is it Lancer lore, Ian? Who can say?
I don't know. And Brandon is frustratingly vague in towards Brandon and doesn't actually answer questions.
I don't know why he's so weird about it. The way I read this book, they are simply saying that they were called this one thing in the past and now they call them something different and they're the same thing, and that's what I'm going to stick to. Like, I think that the Larkin that we know of are like juvenile Lancerin, right? So like there's a distinction in that sense that like in the past when you said, you know, let's talk about the Lancerin, it's like they have the full picture of like this is what they are, and now it's like Larkin specifically means the juveniles, but only because like that's all they know to talk of, right? So I think that there's it means the same thing, but it's just kind of in practice maybe it might refer to something more, right? Does that make sense?
See, I got the feeling that it was like two different species, and the Larkin, like, are juveniles, but are also a different species that come from somewhere else.
I don't think so.
Here's
it's
can
just
I
the
read
line
a
is
that I have about this that's related to it at least a little bit. Here we go. It seemed like from the story that there's a strong connection between the Larkin and the ancient Lancer. Would you be willing to answer whether these are the same species by two names or if there is some evolutionary step between them? Brandon, I was a tad vague on purpose, but you're looking at it the right way. It's kind of the same species.
Like, Brandon, what are you talking about? Like,
yeah.
So that's what I think. I mean, the quote in the book is, it is no simple thing to make a creature as heavy as a Lancer or Larkin, as they are now called, fly. And so to me, I think what Brandon is getting at is they are like biologically, these are the same creature, but the Larkin that we know of are only the juveniles. And so the word means the juveniles because it has never been applied to something beyond that.
And I could see, like, especially if they were mysterious, ancient, powerful beings, like it might not have been clear to people that they were in fact the same thing. You know what I mean? Like, It's possible that nobody, that wasn't a thing that they were aware of, you know, or like Cheery, like in Rhythm of War, seems to like have a much like stronger intelligence than I had ever kind of realized. But
yeah, she talks.
It's kind of she talks and it's kind of moving, you know, but like if you were to look at her in an earlier stage, you'd be like, oh, this is just kind of like a cool flying bug, you know? So like, it's possible that there's just it's not obvious this is the same thing to people.
Well, because the other thing with Larkin is that most of Roshar also thinks they're extinct.
That's true too.
Like there's 3 that the Sleepless are aware of that are currently living, that like ultimately like escaped from Amia. Maybe the other 2 are also were in the Rushy Isles, maybe or somewhere else, but like so far we know like who knows how old Cheery is, or if there's been like a breeding population of Larkin that never matured.
It seems like they would have to be able to, unless they're really old. Yeah, maybe it is like some sort of like actual transformation. Like you just power up enough and you kind of turn into a different species a little bit,
Yeah,
Cosmere Digimon.
The other half of that wob is somebody asking, is it like a Pokemon evolution? And Brandon Raffos that.
Because I think it's Words of Radiance. We get the illustration of like the Chol life chart of like juvenile, like pupation to adult Kremling to second pupation to senescence. And I think that's kind of the blueprint for Rosharn species across the board, like because it happens with like great shells, like the chasm fiends. So I think it would make sense to me that would also happen with the Larkin / Lancerin. So it's like if they're juveniles, like are they sexually mature?
Who can say?
It's wild that there's only 3 of them, right?
I know.
Yeah.
I know. I always am like, are you wanting the species to be extinct, Brandon? Like functionally extinct? Because that's what we're doing. But I always hate when things go extinct, though. So whatever.
Cultivation, you're failing at your job. Yeah. You're like the nature goddess, like unextinct species, because it's really cool. But like we read the thing, but we didn't really touch on it, of like Lancerin being able to fly. Because like there are like some like Kremlings that can fly, obviously, and all like maybe like more like juvenile like shelled creatures can do it. But then generally that goes away because they get big and shelled. The implication is that Lancerin fully grown can also fly, and that's why they need super Luxpren.
I got the feeling that Lancerin are basically like the Rosharn dragon.
Yeah, I do too. Yep.
If not directly related to the dragons in the rest of the Cosmere, then cousins of the dragons in the rest of the Cosmere.
Well, that's a good, and you think about Cultivation being a dragon, and you could see her being like, I kind of want to make some crab dragons, like I want to make something that's like a little reminiscent of me,
people.
If we don't get dragon-sized Chiri fighting some kind of monster by the end of the Cosmere, I'll be very disappointed.
So it'd be a broken promise, Brandon.
Yeah, this is the natural progression of wheelchair to hover chair to dragon rider.
Dragon rider chair.
Like this, like it's the dream of literally everyone to have a dragon. And if they say they don't dream of being a dragon rider, they're wrong.
The one thing that I've loved learning more about the Lancer, the one that kind of has become like more confusing to me with the additional knowledge is the fact that like Rosharns were successfully able to hunt them to extinction. I'm like, they were killing dragon-sized flying great shells with the intelligence to speak.
Yeah,
pretty impressive. Like it's pretty impressive, especially like
also like,
but like they're
people don't remember
air,
that the Lancerin can speak. Like, how did that fall out of cultural memory? That's kind of a big deal.
You almost have to wonder if the notion that they hunted them to extinction is a little bit overblown.
It's possible.
Like it might just be part of like they think that they did, but maybe there's a little bit more going on.
Yeah, and maybe that has to do with the collapse of the ecology of Amia. Like it's possible that was not helpful.
Yes, but at the same time, like if I was a giant flying dragon of giant flying crab dragon of reasonable intelligence, I would just fly across the water and get food and just like set up shop elsewhere.
Well, maybe the Kremlings that still Stormlight also still whatever makes it so that they can fly.
They are those.
Yeah, that's that.
That's them.
Well then, they would not steal from themselves.
Well, it's like the ones that show up in the books are just hordlings that were crossbred with Lancerin back in the day. But still, ultimately, that's them.
Yeah, but like who knows? Like, we know that they needed to be on the island for the sprint. Like it's possible, it's possible that they'd be like, oh, some nutrient, you know what I mean, or like something that was necessary is not there anymore, and that became a problem. But yeah, I like the idea, Josh, that like they're taking a little bit too much credit for the destruction of the Lancer. That would be very consistent with Rasharan's.
Could the super Lux Spren that they need to eat have become basically extinct, and thus they couldn't continue the life cycle?
I don't think so, because they're like freaking everywhere, like chasm fiends and
it's like,
but there's
it's a special breed of Lux Spren, because it's like they're like ultra powerful magic. Mathematically speaking, all great shells fly because they're too heavy to actually exist. They just can't get off the ground. Lancerin can, so they just have more powerful Lux Spren, apparently, that only like exist here for some reason.
It is reminiscent to me, and I've never been able to kind of like chase this idea to like a conclusion, but like we know that like the chasm fiends have like a whole life cycle, but they come like, and they're like, we know they live elsewhere, but like they come to the plains to pupate, and the Larkin go to Amia to pupate. So there's like a piece of me that's like, I wonder, like, is there something about the place, like maybe like the presence of the Dawnshard, like change these Lux Spren or something like that, like, I don't know, but it's just a parallel that I'd noticed before.
Yeah, it's like trying to figure out, like, is there a magical reason for this, or is this just like salmon spawning instinctively go back to their river? Yeah. But fingers crossed for more Lancern in the future. I would like Chiri to not be the last of the Lancern. It seems like they were pretty good protectors of the Dawnshard because it didn't get stolen on their watch, unlike the Sleepless. And they're like the perfect entity to do it, because like, oh yeah, like someone's does get in and like consumes, like becomes the Dawnshard. They can just suck all of the investiture out of that person, so they can't do anything with it, and then they can just eat them.
Do you think they could pull the Dawnshard out of someone if they wanted to?
I don't think so.
No.
I mean, if they kill them, right?
Yeah, for sure. That would work. I was just thinking more like their investiture. So, like, but it seems to me like it's probably integrated too tightly with your soul to do that. But it was just a thought.
Yeah, like I think they can get more loose investiture, like Stormlight, Voidlight, the various lights. They could probably feed on breath, I would guess.
I'm a little skeptical about breath. I was wondering about like Spren. Can they can they eat a Spren? And I'm skeptical to assume that they can do that.
Yeah. I think that's probably beyond the line.
It makes me think that something as sticky as breath would be more like on the Spren side of the line, where it's kind of more tightly integrated and you can't just pull it free that easily. But
now I'm wondering if there's a way to unlock breath, like unlock metal metals.
I think if you didn't have an identity, you would probably be able to. Breath would be up for grabs, but I don't know if they'd be able to suck it out of your soul still. It's interesting. We gotta have more, Brandon. I like this is definitely a back 5 expectation from me. Like, I don't know where Risen's story is going, but like we're like, this is a cool Amia tease, but this cannot be all we get. Like, it's gotta be more relevant.
Yeah, once you start talking about like weather machines, like, Brandon, we have to come back here at some point. Like, and maybe that's in the Herald flashbacks for the back 5. There's been too much weird and cool stuff mentioned about Amia. Like, 2 different alien species showed up and they just shoved them on this island. Like, where did the Sleepless come from? Where did the Sia Amians come from?
It is funny how the Sia Amians were like the only Amians we knew at first, and now they're the Amians we know almost nothing about.
I can understand that the Sleepless would become associated with the island after like they've spent time there, I guess, guarding the Dawnshard or whatever else. I'm absolutely baffled what the Sia Aemians have to do with Aemia at all. Like, I don't know.
I mean,
Where
they
did-
lived there.
Yeah, I assume they lived there as well.
I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, that was their place.
Yeah, but like, why are they why are they there? Is
Maybe they
the
came
question.
together.
Where did they come from? What are they doing there?
Yeah, there's lots of off-world waves of like people to Rishar. You know, like we have the Ashenites, we've got the Iriali, we've got the Sleepless, we've got the Sia Aemians potentially as a separate one.
Yeah. Like I just kind of see it as like, I mean, they gave the Iriali their own Silver Kingdom. Why not give like the blue-skinned people and the bug people? Like, they're weird. We're just gonna give them like the island off the coast and let them do their thing.
And potentially, like, depending on who set up those weather machines, like I could see them like it being like a barren patch of land that they were like, well, you know what, we are knowledgeable enough to do something with this. You know, I don't actually understand where all of like the flora and fauna would have come from unless the shards got involved, but you know.
Yeah. They just imported it. Like, and obviously like they attracted like human settlers. Because
because there are human avians too. We learned in this.
Yeah, like they're the ones with the beards wrapped in cords that are mentioned in Way of Kings and never explained, and were a huge mystery for many books.
But I don't know if we could term that as a huge mystery.
It was a mild curiosity that was occasionally remarked on.
The fans were clamoring, "Where are the cord beard men?" Brandon.
I do like love that story though of like, I don't know, this group of humans that kind of were exiled from their home and now they're still culturally distinct, right? All these millennia later, but
I mean, kind of like the Romani.
Yeah. Speaking of other interesting cultures, can we talk about the Horn Eaters a little bit? Because this was some good Horn Eater lore.
Yes.
We get a lot of stuff from Cord about the backstory of, well, maybe not the backstory. We get a lot from Cord about their myths, I guess. Like she's dropping references to the Dawnshard coming through. She makes all these references to the bow of hours that her father drew. We get this idea of the sighted, that they can see the Spren, that the Spren can aid them, like give them strength or maybe other things. There's just a lot of Horn Eater stuff that we had no idea about.
Like some of these things, like we had hints about, like we knew like the special status of like some Horn Eaters being able to see Spren. I think there's like are implications like in earlier books of like Rock being stronger than he should be.
Because he draws the grand bow to kill Amaram, which is kind of a mystery because Stormlight doesn't so much grant you strength as it does other things. I do feel like my little theory is that their ability to kind of seemingly do stuff with common Spren is probably like almost like a pseudo form. Like it's a little bit of a tie back to the singers being able to take on forms that they can do maybe temporary brief bonds with common Spren to do some cool little magic.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. Any culture that lives next to a perpendicularity, interesting, because they've known what it is. Like they don't use the term perpendicularity, but they know it's the portal to the land of the gods, and if you go in there, you wind up in a weird place.
Well, there's a whole Horn Eater tribe on the other side, isn't there? I'm pretty sure we learned that as well. So. Like, yeah,
that's coming more to wide knowledge. Like Cord talks about it with Rissyn as like people are going to know this anyways pretty soon. So like I'm just going to tell you. But going back to the Cord trying to trick Nickley into an automatic defeat by referencing the treaty he had no idea about. Like she references like it was with different gods than the gods who sleep not. Who are the other gods that you made a treaty with? Like obviously some sort of Spren, but like which Spren? That's what I care about.
Is it the Spren of the mountains and the Spren of, whoever that they made their deal with to like create the Horn Eater Peaks in the first place in their mythology that we hear referenced in Words of Radiance?
Shrug. I did have the same thought. Like if it seems unlikely that it's just like, I don't know, like more mundane sprint. Like it feels like it's got to be something special that had some kind of authority or power to make a treaty with.
Yeah.
Hey, Brandon, I'm looking at you because you're definitely watching this. You watch all of our content. Please write not Dawnshard. You already wrote Dawnshard. Please write Horneater.
Yep.
The book with Rock that you've been talking about for years. I want it.
I know. If you had pitched like these 3 novellas to me and said like, which one do you want the most? Well, I don't know. Dawnshard would have been tempting, but like the plot, just the plot wise, like the one I'm definitely most interested in is like Rock and like what's going on with that. Like he definitely seems to have, like when they're talking about him drawing the bow of hours, like we've always known that there's like more to Rock than he really wants to let on, you know? And like at first it just seemed like, oh yeah, like he was a warrior, but I just want to talk about that, you know? And then like we learn later that it seems like he's probably like the new Atoma of his tribe. And you're like, oh, he's got, you know, he's even a little more authority than I thought. And now he's drawing the bow of hours. And I'm like, are you the chosen one for your people? Like, how big does this get?
Yeah, it's like there's a little bit of like King Arthur drawing the sword from the stone, not Excalibur. Excalibur was a different. But like I know like drawing a bow means something different than drawing a sword from a stone, but I'm like, no, I just can't help but think of Rock as King Arthur of the Horneaters.
He drew the bow of hours at the dawn of the new millennium, heralding the years of change.
The dawn, of the Horneater calendar.
I don't know. The years of change is like not, in one sense, is not too hard to parse. Obviously, the last desolation that's going on is kind of, there's a lot of change that's happening, right? But it's interesting that this was prophesied, I guess, in their mythology.
And they definitely had access to the pure essence of a shard, so you could definitely see them having some reasonably accurate prophecies that somebody might have figured out at some point, just messing around with the cultivation of perpendicularity.
I don't know what this bow of ours is, like why it exists and why it's been sitting there ready for somebody to draw it.
Is he the only one who drew it, or is it like a family tradition where each child, because Rock is not the eldest child when he originally came down from the mountains. He was the third child. So is it more of like the royal family type thing where the royal family has this bow that at coming of age, each child draws and it tells about their future?
Maybe we know that most dead shard blades were locked in blade form, but maybe the Horneaters have an ancient shard blade that when it died was locked into bow form for some reason. I could see that happening.
That would be cool.
That would be very cool.
Like a true shard bow. That'd be kind of fun.
And they just don't know it's a shard.
That would be so ironic too, because they're just desperately wanting a shard blade. They've got one in a different form and don't realize it, you know? That'd be interesting. Yeah, well, you know what? The good news is we'll all know in 2028. So, mark your calendars, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah,
it'll be good to have something to tide us over while we're waiting for Stormlight 6. We'll start to miss the world,
and then like maybe we'll get King Lupin the First, King of Alethkar.
Don't talk about that one. I tolerated Lopin in this book, but I do not have any interest in King Lopin the First of Alethkar.
You don't want Lopin Elhokar shenanigans set in the time of Words of Radiance?
Yeah. I think that could be funny, like as a little short.
Yeah, it's definitely a short. It's not a novella. I don't think that can sustain a novella.
Like he always like said it was like a short story.
Yeah.
Right, like deleted scene length thing and posted on the website. I'll accept that.
That's fine.
Yeah.
So, y'all, I promised it at the top of the episode. It's potatoes time. So we learned some interesting interactions of pairing Fabrials and aluminum.
Brandon needed
hijack stuff.
Brandon needed to establish the fourth bridge before it happened.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It was like a fun thing to kind of watch them like stumble into it, right? Like it very clearly sets up how these things work. Well, mostly clearly sets up how these pairing fabrials work. And then like you get to like see, it's fun when Huyo has his little accident that does something weird, and then they, Rushu's able to find a way to apply it, and then they make something out of it. It's a fun little progression like during the course of the story.
It's an awesome little like penicillin moment, where they're like, wait a minute, what's going on? And then it's just like a huge game changing situation. And it really does also successfully foreshadow that the allomantic metals are relevant in Fabrial craft. We've got aluminum, and this one fits particularly well, as opposed to some of the other ones you're kind of like, like they sort of make sense with Fabrials. They're parallels with allomancy, but aluminum, I think that it's a really nice, for instance, where you're like, oh look, aluminum has impacts on other magic systems, and here's aluminum doing a similar thing on Fabrials,
Yeah, like aluminum is probably like the one like we have the most of that with its just general investiture nullification. It's like really like the epigraphs for Rhythm of War, where we're like, oh wait, the other metals like are also relevant.
For sure. I'm saying it's like foreshadowing when we get to that, And I don't know, it's good. It makes the pairing Fabrials just a lot more flexible. Before it was, they were cool, but like the SpanReads seemed like about the limit of what you could kind of do with them without being able to sever the pairing in some direction. Like maybe they could have done speakers or something, but other than that,
yeah, it's like isolating vectors is important. And I liked the little, I beta read this book. And like the little comment about like the gemstones used, and like usually for reversers we use amethyst, but you can also use rubies. I'm like, that was one of my comments. I'm just very proud of that line because I think it's like was in some. I think it was like an Oathbringer or something, or maybe Rhythm of War. I don't remember. This was years ago. But like Brandon kept like using like reversers made from rubies. I'm like, Brandon, that's not what you say in the Ars Arcanum. Conjoiners are rubies, reversers are amethyst. And then he tosses this line and is like, yeah, but not always. Fine, I'll accept this.
Turns out Artifabrians have a healthy bit of tradition and superstition, I suppose,
but like
or obfuscation of how things can work.
Mm-hmm. But like, is it only rubies and amethysts that work? Like, why not? Why not other pole stones?
Brandon's in like Brandon's in a tricky spot with Fabrials because like they are so like the application of them is like so you could do so much with the concept of Fabrials, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it relies on like these mechanics that are like way too detailed to get into. You want it to be like technology. You want it to be like engineering something, and you can't like explain in a fantasy book like all the nuances of without like there's just so much that goes into it. And so he walks like a difficult line between like needing to give you a little bit to like go off of and I don't know, fill in your imagination with, but he can't get into too much detail or else he just kind of writes himself into these weird corners.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or makes it way less interesting and scientific than it should be.
Yeah, and definitely like with the fatigue you see in Rhythm of War with even that level of like magical science, like there's just no way there's appetite for among broad fans digging into exactly how Fabrials are supposed to work and what the metals all do exactly and how the gemstones impact. Like you can there's little nods at it and you see it sometimes, but it's just one of those things that's not going to be codified in the same way we're never going to know what all the god metal alloys do. It's too much.
Normal people don't want a 10-page essay on precisely how the gemstone cut affects the efficiency of the Fabrial.
And Brandon would rather write a novella than do that. Far and away would rather do that.
Yeah, because like in my mind, it's like the cut of the gem and like what gem it is, like kind of determines like what kind of spread you can get. And then like it's not as simple as like tapping a bit of metal on the gem. It's like it's the cage of wires like is important, and the configuration of that cage
And the pattern
is
of light,
important. The pattern of
according to
light.
that Sway of Kings page. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like I think a lot of time and discussion of this stuff, like we do overly simplify that because that's all that can really be discussed in the books. But like no, like this is like technology. It's a lot more complicated than we're thinking it is.
It's fun to see the parallels between, you have to cut the gem in a certain way and you have to use a specific gem to hemalurgy, and you have to hit a certain spot on the body with a certain metal in order to get. So it's fun to see the parallels there.
This is why I'm a little bit skeptical that we will ever get the metal mind like lore that people want. Like Brandon has his like
how to make a medallion?
Yeah, like
that he promised us. And that
I'm just skeptical he can ever get into the level of detail people are wanting on that, because I don't think he's going to want to. I think it's going to be the same issue there where. I don't know.
Sounds like,
especially when you get into the future, like maybe like the easiest medallions, sure, we can like explain how you do that. But like in Era 3 or whatever, we're probably going to get just some wild Farukami stuff that
I'd like the like I think we know like the basic principles of like there's like identity and microsil investiture shenanigans going on. I'd like one step up, please. I don't need anything higher than that. I just need a little bit more to go on.
And it's definitely, I feel like some of these things, it just comes down to like, and this is how it works. Like I remember when, like, with the fact that we're in full spoilers, like people being surprised that like they were like, how are the Windspren's identity working with Kaladin? And I'm like, they can just connect. Like that's it. They just connect. That there's not some mechanic that needs to be unwound there. Sometimes it just happens.
Sounds to me like perfect supplemental material for the RPG, because that's exactly the right place to go into the details of. Is if you want to build this into your RP, here's the mechanics of how it works.
Yes and no.
The trick is they need like Brandon's approval to do like at a certain level, like you need his input on it, and then it's a fight for how much time you can get with Brandon to like bless what you're putting in.
Yeah, because like otherwise, like does have a high commitment to making sure everything is canon. Like the mechanics that exist in the Cosmere for Fabrials, like how much that's actually required for like the mechanics of how to use a Fabrial or make a Fabrial in the game. And it's like for the game, that's what matters, not so much of like what cut of gem. Like that's more flavor stuff. That's not really necessary to have a good game.
Nobody playing the RPG wants to sit around while the one Artifabrian party member like rolls their d20 to see if they're able to cut their gem at 36 degrees instead of 34.
Like that's going to be a 3% efficiency loss on your spellcaster. That is not going to be great, guys. Yeah,
what I love a RPG that's just Artifabrianing. My brain I think my brain has just short-circuited and I'm just going to stop talking.
Yeah, we could probably have a nice, really thorough discussion on like how interesting the perception with like the whole like paired Fabrials like on the boat or whatever, and it's like, is it moving? Is it how does that work? And like what does aluminum isolate? Like there's I don't know that anybody wants us to hear us like go on and on about that, but there's an interesting like, I don't know, getting into the nitty-gritty of paired Fabrials with like, can you use it on a train? Yeah, with the frame of reference, and the orientations of gems is gets pretty trippy. I remember like, I don't know, getting into that when this book came out, but
yeah, because like it does like solve some of the like the thought experimenting of SpanReads like prior to this book of like, okay, like if it's going in the same way, like do like the people on two sides have to orient their boards the same way, like
or if they're operating
like the sphericalness of the planet, how is that interacting? It's like, no, it's like forward is forward, and all of that based on like what people using the Fabrials are doing.
It is nice to have the perception thing to always fall back on when you're like, I don't want to get into the fact that someone is at 30 degrees of latitude and someone's at 45 degrees of latitude. They feel like they're both standing on flat ground, or like the orientation is the same.
Any other thoughts anybody has?
Is there anything else you want to say about Amia?
I think we kind of just covered it.
Who built the weather machines? Who built them? When and why?
Sleepless. I don't know how. I don't know why. Well, they're built to protect the island, right? Like that's like that had to have been done to protect the Dawnshard.
Well, they were built to like make Amia habitable.
Yeah, it was like that's what the scouring was.
Okay.
Yeah. I am interested in the storm that was around Amia that was disrupted by the arrival of the Everstorm. I'm very curious about what was creating that.
Like I would be surprised if it was like the weather machines retrofitted to make a border storm.
That's true. They could have had like a couple that were still functional that they did something else with. That's an excellent point.
That was my understanding, but I guess that's an assumption there.
Well, that seems like everything for Dawnshard. So thank you for watching. You can find us at 17thshard.com for all the news, discussion, theories, and fun that you could ever want. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, SoundCloud. You can leave us a review on iTunes. You can subscribe on YouTube, and you can also support us on Patreon. See you next time. Bye.
Peace.
Bye.
See ya.